Well, thank you, Kerry. Welcome everybody to our virtual Perfect Storm event. As I said before, it is a webinar, but we're hoping to be a bit more interactive than a webinar perhaps would be. It may be sensible to put yourselves on mute until such time as there's an opportunity to ask a question. So my name's Helen Goss and I'm a partner with Boyce Turner, and we're a law firm who do an awful lot in the leisure and hospitality sector. It's a brilliant sector to work in. It's really creative and innovative. There's some fantastic career opportunities for the people working in the sector, some fantastic talent. And of course, it's a really resilient sector. And that really sort of brings me to why we started up our Perfect Storm events about 3 years ago. It was when Brexit reared its head. So it was about sharing ideas, sharing concerns, and in some respects, sharing the trauma really, and build community about what was going to happen with Brexit. But of course, recently, I think our main topic has been COVID and everything that has brought with it. So the lockdowns, and of course, it's really hit the hospitality sector very badly. And on top of that, we've got Brexit round the corner. So it does feel a little that the sector is under siege, with businesses closed, furlough, redundancies, yes, some government support, but undoubtedly tough times. But it is a resilient sector. And at the HOSPA conference that I attended last week, there was a poll of delegates about what they felt about the coming year. And Jane may be able to shed a bit more light on that. But I was really impressed by the sort of general optimism around that, and the feeling that as soon as the sector was able to properly open, then it would really bounce back. So that was great to see. But of course, we've had Boris's announcements on Monday. So some of you are going to be able to open, although there's some controversy as to whether practically the whole country is going to be in the higher tiers or not. So there's more to hear in relation to that. So presumably good news for some, but perhaps not so much good news for others. I mean, there's no doubt that businesses have been feeling very anxious, and so are the employees. And of course, we know that our staff can make or break a business, whichever sector we're in. I mean, we know that in the professional services sector, our people are so important. And particularly in your sector, the reviews, they're either great or terrible, usually focusing on staff service or staff attitude. So really, our people are very centre to us going forward positively. But there's a risk that our employees are in bad shape, or pretty bad shape. They've perhaps had reduced pay, they've had the redundancies of their colleagues, they've got fear about their own jobs, they've just got anxiety about the future. And of course, some of them may have some very difficult personal circumstances, whether that's their own illness or perhaps caring for a loved one who has been ill. Tragically, it could include bereavement, but also financial hardship and that uncertainty. So that set me thinking about the level of goodwill and the level of morale in the sector amongst employees. And it would be interesting to get your views in the chat panel, if you feel like putting comments in the chat panel about how you think your employees are feeling. So I think it's really important for us to start working out how we can engage our people and really make use and harness that goodwill that we know that you have with a lot of your staff. And can we do it without pay rises or bonuses or financial incentives? Because inevitably we're in a sector where the finances are tight. So I think it's a really interesting area to discuss. But you're not really here to listen to me. So I have got a fantastic panel who've come together. So I'd just like to do a really quick introduction to them before we start to hear from them. So we have Jane Pendlebury, who is the CEO from HOSPA, and that's an organisation for hospitality professionals. So welcome, Jane. We have Dr. Jonathan Smith, who is a performance and people development psychologist, and he works in the corporate world, but also with elite athletes, including the Football Association, British Canoeing, the Olympic Committee, and Formula One and Formula Two. So very glamorous, I have to say, Jonathan.
It would be Connors.
Our third panelist is Rachel Banks, who is the Assistant Director of People and Culture at the Dorchester, and they have a lot of interesting initiatives which Rachel's going to share with us. And last but definitely not least is Richard Eastburn, who is the MD of Assa Abloy, who are Assa Abloy Global Solutions, who are suppliers of hotel security solutions to the hospitality sector. And as I've said before, suppliers have also been affected by what has been happening in the sector. So we're going to hear from each of our panelists and hopefully answer some questions at the end. So if you do have questions, then if you could put them in the panel, then Kerry will be able to pick up the questions, and then hopefully we can answer some at the end. So we're going to start by having a chat with Jane. So Jane, in your position as the CEO of HOSPA, I mean, you've obviously got an overview as to how the sector is feeling at the moment, particularly as you're fresh from the conference last week. So what would you say was the mood of your membership in the hospitality sector as a whole?
Yes, it's picking up on what you've already said. They're a very optimistic bunch by nature anyway, I believe, creative and resilient. But I would be doing them a disservice if I didn't say they were feeling a little battered and bruised at the moment. You know, a lot of investment, when there was already no money in the bank, a lot of investment was made into making premises COVID secure and doing lots of extra checks to ensure that they could stay open safely. And then, you know, the newest restrictions almost seem to be the harshest, or hospitality have been hardest hit. So you know, but they're so resilient. They are still moving forward as positively as possible and being creative, looking at different ways of doing things. You know, going back to the takeaways and all those bits and pieces that have happened before. But there's also lots of worry. I know this is about people today in many ways. So there's lots of worries about, you know, their employees, their teams, their fellow workers, whatever. There's just that horrible concern and that worry in the pit of your stomach, which I guess, you know, we nearly everybody at some stage in their career has gone through that redundancy where either they've been made redundant or their colleagues have been made redundant, and it doesn't make for a very nice atmosphere. Even when everything else is all right, it's not good. But yeah, optimistic, I would say. Got their creative heads on, and yeah, thinking of new ways to make revenue and different things like that. So yeah, sad, battered, bruised, but optimistic and positive thinking.
I mean, that's great to hear. But do you think that our focus today is looking forward and particularly sort of harnessing that goodwill that we have got in the bank for our employees? Do you think that the sector has the luxury of thinking about this, or do you think they're just in complete survival mode and just trying to sort of get through it without necessarily thinking about whether they're bringing their people with them or not?
Definitely survival is the name of the game at the moment, and that's everybody's focus. And throughout our membership, I've seen completely diverse views on this, but ways of treating it. There's certain groups out there who've gone over and above to make sure their employees are engaged, whether that's through Facebook groups or Zoom calls, or, you know, the quizzes that we all probably got a bit sick of during that first lockdown. But a lot of people have gone above and beyond to ensure the well-being and the positivity of their employees whilst on furlough or working in teams, because a lot of them have done shift work so that they've got little bubbles within teams as well, and they've worked on that. So I think a lot of it will be how they were treated sort of at the worst, whether they were cared about, or whether it was is all about cash flow. I think that those that treated their staff better will come out a lot stronger at the end of it. And you know, I could tell you today who's done that really well, and sadly there are those who haven't done that to the same degree, and they will pay the price.
No, that's a really interesting thought. And I mean, as employment lawyers, we do see that there's a lot of dissatisfaction and perhaps that failure to engage with staff and deal with the questions or the concerns that they've had can have that effect of sort of losing people's hearts and minds, which is challenging. Thank you
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jane. So Jonathan, I mean, you're going to lead a session on goodwill and the sense of belonging in that employment environment. So what would you say was goodwill, and why is it important, and how can we create or grow goodwill amongst our employees? That's a huge question, so take your time to answer.
Yeah. Firstly, hi everyone, and looking forward to this and having the conversation a little bit later on about this area. So when we're looking at goodwill, we're talking about this idea of an emotionally positive feeling to another person, to an organisation, and this is something that can happen both ways, both from an organisation to an employee or employee to an organisation. But it is that sense of feeling of value and feeling of trust and sense of feeling of belonging within it. As has already been alluded to by both Helen and Jane, the reality of the situation is that at the moment in different industries and organisations, there'll be those who are losing, redundancy, furlough, etc. Those who are adapting to the new norm and looking to see how they can still find a way through it, and those who are actually thriving in this situation. And in different industries, and we do find those people who are also thriving. And depending on where they're at, that will have an influence on how we might go about building goodwill. If we look particularly probably at the strongest ones of those people who are losing, they're likely to be going through a range of emotions as they sort of transition in one way or another. Those emotions that they experience are things around denial, anger, frustration, anxiety for themselves and for their family, about what does this mean for me, but what does it also mean for my kids and my wife and my husband in that situation. And they're all real natural, normal reactions that they're going to have. And as a final element of why it's important is of this goodwill, is because actually at the moment, and this isn't, COVID is exceptional in itself, but actually business itself, there's an element of uncertainty now. And that uncertainty probably is getting quicker and quicker. I think if we went back for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we'd probably be more clear, more certain about what was going to happen. But the world seems like it's moving quicker and quicker in what we're doing. And there's good evidence actually to suggest that the furthest that we can actually forecast about what we're certain about is probably around about a year. 400 odd days is what they seem to suggest. And therefore, with that uncertainty comes ups and downs of how we're going to have to adapt, how we're going to have to move and change in those situations. And whilst we adapt, what we need to really draw on is that goodwill that we might experience. And that's sort of why the important part of it is. In terms of how we go about developing it, as a starting point, I think this, again, something which Jane picked up really nicely, was this idea of actually, firstly around that understanding about what the individual is going through. And when we're doing that, what we're doing is trying to create a sense of connection with them and a sense of belonging and sense of value in that person. That person feels valued, even though in this extreme, difficult, challenging situation, as an organization, as an individual, as a director, as a head of, I still see your value, even if we can't be in the business place at this point in time. I still see your value, not just as an employee, but as a person in that moment. And that's a really, really important part of it. There's a little story about sort of Procter & Gamble, who in the sort of I think it was about 2015, around that sort of time, they had some real difficulties, and at that point they weren't able to reward and show value to their employees in their normal way through sort of extrinsic rewards of pay and extra and bonuses. And that wasn't guaranteed as much now for them. And so what the leaders in those organizations in Procter & Gamble went to do was actually to go about creating this great sense of belonging through how they termed it was leaning into the situation, leaning into the challenge rather than hiding away from the challenge, and being more visible to their employees. And that wasn't just about their immediate subordinates, but actually those below them. So actually moving down and really finding out and being alongside those people in that moment in time. And it can't be stressed enough the importance of actually allowing somebody to actually speak and to be heard in those moments. And that creates that real sense of belonging. So that's one really critical element of it. I think a second critical element of it is to consider how we help people to not only, how we can help people to recover rather than rescue them by helping them move through the transition, particularly if people are moving from a furlough to redundancy situation. And how can we still help in terms of that goodwill, even in that situation? And that for me is around this idea of creating a goal, a sense of purpose and clarity of that purpose. We know that part is a really important element to help somebody feel a level of self-worth, is having that clarity of purpose. And in times in this situation, that sense of purpose will have to change and have to adapt in some way. Within one of the groups that I work with, British Canoeing, you'll hopefully have seen in terms of the Olympic Games, which was meant to be about 3 months ago, and the Paralympic Games didn't happen. Back in April, March time, when we found out that it was going to be, wasn't happening, that was all we heard at that point in time. There was this massive uncertainty for the athletes and what they were going to do, and this thing that they have been aiming for the last 4 to 8 years, and for some of them the only opportunity they had. This had gone for a period of time. There was hope it was going to be moved back, and eventually it did get moved back. But there was this real sense of uncertainty about what we're going to do in that moment in time. So one of the things that we did during that period of time, when they had this real loss of sense of purpose, and therefore what am I about? What do I do? How do I stay motivated in this time? We start to explore this idea of what is the opportunity through this period of ambiguity that we were in at that point. What's that opportunity that we can have, and really start to explore about how do we've got this sense of purpose and whatever it was for that individual, how can we redefine that and explore it in this new norm that we're in? How do we go about doing what we do to achieve it in that lockdown situation? And how do we go about staying connected with those people whilst we're in it, to actually then help each other to still fulfill their level of purpose? And if you haven't seen, there's a really good, and a lot of people will have done, but if you haven't seen this video by Simon Sinek, if you go to YouTube on Start With Why, it's a really great example of the importance of that question of why. Why do we do what we do, and how do we come up with a new one? That's a really great place to go to. But we explored this area, and a lot of people during that period of time actually were able to stay really motivated, do the behaviors that they wanted to do to achieve their purpose, but they're showing those behaviors in a really different way. So they were able to adapt really effectively in that point in time. The really brilliant news off the back of that was actually when they came back and came out of lockdown back in July and back on the water and back into training, what they found was actually that they're still able to achieve PBs. And out of a group of 16 athletes on the para-canoe team, 13 of those 16 actually went on to hit PBs for it, which is an amazing feat on their part. And we've learned a huge amount about how that adapts. We need to adapt for this coming 12 months. So that sense of belonging, that sense of purpose. And the final one is looking to help people to have a sense of competence in the situation. When people get a lot of their competence and feeling of that they're good at stuff through what they do and work, they lost that element. So how do we help them create a sense of competence in a different way to show that they're good at something, that they're improving in something or other. That link with a purpose is a really important one.
So, Jonathan, all of those things, I mean, absolutely, I can completely understand. But how do you think that you can actually put those ideas into action? What sort of things might you expect to see to demonstrate that as an employer you're thinking about these things?
So it very much depends on the context and the individual, on what that actually looks like for it. So when we look at a sense of belonging, activities such as the quizzes, etc., those are one element of it. But other elements of actually, as I talked about at that beginning part, of actually those conversations with the employees and where they're at, how they are, what are their challenges, what are they going through at the moment, creates that sense of belonging is really important. Line managers, if they can do, having conversations with individuals about how during this period of time, what do they want to make the most of during this period of time? How could they use this time to get a different benefit whilst it's really tough and really challenging and really difficult? Having conversations around that would be a really, really great way of developing that sense of a new sense of purpose. I heard some really good stories of some people who actually have, because of how their actual industry, and this was a delivery company, and who they normally deliver to weren't needing their services anymore. They moved their delivery to a different avenue and moved it to working with charities and providing support in terms of PPEs, for example. And that created the individuals, the workers as such, a sense of purpose of actually, we might not be able to do our own normal job here, but here's what we're doing instead. And we're actually benefiting other people, which also then helps benefit ourselves.
I suppose that we did see that a lot, didn't we, in the hospitality sector, because the hospitality sector were opening up its hotels to key workers, the NHS, delivering meals to key workers or schools, or I'm not going to say what the Dorchester was in because I don't want to take away Rachel's thunder, but a lot of organisations were doing similar sorts of things. So presumably that was ticking the box in a lot of respects, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And by them doing these things, by us helping people to show that sense of belonging, purpose and competence, what we're going to then build with the sort of employees, with the people, is about that building of trust. That's a really important bit. We're going to build that sense of confidence in themselves and also in the team. We'll strengthen relationships. We'll help people not feel like that they're just an asset, an employee, but also a person who's valued in those situations. And then when things go wrong, and they do, we know that we will always have ups and downs, and this is one, but there will be other ones in the future. When those things happen, by building this sense of goodwill with our employees, and between employees and the organisation, then when things go wrong, they're going to likely stay with us for longer. They're likely to, when we get through this, and we want to bring people back in, they're going to be wanting to come back in and be willing to come back in. They're likely to do more in those situations than they would do otherwise without that sense of goodwill. So there's real benefits out there as to if we can do it, if we can put in the people connection element to it, then they will give back fivefold from it.
So this is a slightly odd question, but are there indicators which show that we actually do have the goodwill of our employees or the engagement of our employees?
Yeah, so the things that we're likely to see in that situation are things like willingness to forgive blunders and mistakes, that element to it.
That's an important one.
Yeah, it is. So they won't go for the minutiae in the situations. They recognise that intentions are right. We'll see that actually we will, by having good levels of goodwill, we'll be attracting people to the situations. And that's different from a sort of a structured or forced goodwill through a monetary element to it. People admire our genuineness in that situations. we'll get more opportunities. People will be more willing to go that extra mile, do those extra little bits and pieces for it, adapt. If you've got any engagement measures within the organisations, those engagement measures will be higher because of that level of goodwill that they show. And particularly in terms of things like with new joiners, that goodwill can help engage the team and the colleagues in that situation. The final one which I'd add into this is around that area of perception of trust. And the trust that is shown between us, employee and us, will be higher if we've got a higher level of goodwill in those situations.
No, absolutely. So the big question, which it is worrying, because we've heard Boris or the Chancellor, I can't remember, or probably both of them, saying that there aren't going to be any pay rises for a vast majority of key workers. And obviously I'm not going to have a political discussion at all, but it just leads on to my question of how important is money in relation to levels of goodwill? You know, if we do give our people pay rises or bonuses for having a hard time, or some other sort of incentivization, is that going to put us ahead of the game or not? So
if we go to some of the research, and there isn't actually research directly about money and goodwill, but there is about some good bit of research around money and happiness. And what they've found is that money as such, and the financial element, almost gets us to a certain point. It gets us to reduce down the stress and insecurity and feeling of the basic needs. So it gets us to a certain point. After that certain point, then the financial element doesn't actually necessarily increase our happiness levels. The happiness levels increase through other factors about feeling of our value, and that's what they find, that actually how much we feel valued within the organisation and how much we are looked after, and that sense of belonging, that is a higher indicator of happiness than a financial element to it. So yes, money's important, but money's only important to a certain point. It gets us to that neutral place. It removes the stresses of day-to-day stresses and some of the underpinning needs we have of safety and security. But it's definitely not the most important part of it once we've hit that point. Particularly as when money isn't a commodity that a lot of organisations have available. And so instead, what we need to use are our other strengths, our other assets that we have available to us. Our relationships being one of those. And if we use that asset, that will be as strong as something else. To give just a personal example of that, the paracanoe team, British Canoeing Paracanoe team, which I work with, are a fantastic team to work with. I work with them because of the relationships I have with them, rather than for the money that I get paid for by them. I have turned down personally other organisations and other work, which was more lucrative to work with them, but I've stayed because of the relationship that I have, and the sense of actually we've got a team purpose of what we're trying to achieve, and we haven't finished that yet. And that's the reason why I've stayed with them. So I've got the goodwill with that organisation to why I do it. Money's a point of it, but it's not the be all and end all.
I think in some of our previous discussions, Jonathan, you've mentioned that once you get paid at a certain level, then the money definitely isn't. And I think, was that some 70,000
yeah, there was. So that was the research. That research was looking at individuals which were in skilled jobs and individuals who were in it was city type roles, which they were looking at that for it. So they looked at that figure of 70,000. There's a basis which they added to it, which was there's a balance within it in terms of actually how much I earn and what my life looks like. And it's that feeling of actually, is my life actually need more to achieve it and that balance for us. But yeah, that figure was 70,000.
Yeah, and of course in the hospitality sector that there will be very
Few.
small percentage of people
Absolutely.
who were earning at that level. So I just wonder whether that might have a different impact, because it's a high skilled sector, but it is often low paid and often minimum wage. So I don't know whether that you think that would have any impact or not.
Oh, if it will have an impact, if it has an impact, if it influences on the feeling of safety, security for self and family. Yeah. And so what I mean by that is, does it have an impact on where I can live and my ability to stay in my house? Does it have an impact on me being able to put food, etc., and clothing on myself and my loved ones and my family? It has an impact on those levels, those almost fundamental questions that we have. Once we move past that, it reduces down, that the impact of it reduces down. It certainly would have an impact for them.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thank you, Jonathan. I think now might be a good time to ask a couple of questions of Rachel Banks from the Dorchester. So Rachel, part of your role is to look at culture within the Dorchester, and during COVID times, I think that's been, it's been difficult with the hospitality sector being closed down and employees on furlough. So I can imagine that there's been a feeling that a remoteness almost, that people are remote from their place of work. And I've certainly seen, unfortunately, some tribunal claims from the sector which have indicated that to be the case, where there's been not enough communication and people not really understanding what's going on. But I know that when you and I have discussed this, you've talked about a sense of belonging and community in the same way that Jonathan has. So can you share how you've dealt with this, as I know that you've had quite a lot of initiatives going on at the Dorchester?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. So we have been in a fortunate position, but we have had to furlough a lot of our team members, particularly through the beginning of lockdown. And it's not been easy for anyone this journey. And people in hospitality, I'm sure all of you know on here, do not like to sit still. We do not like to sit down for a very long period of time. We like to be active, busy, talking to people, in front of people. And that's something we've really had to understand about our business and in particular our community. And I think when you think about community, you think, what role does everyone play within that? Everyone has a different role that they play. We have people that have been here a very, very long time, people that have worked with us for over 30 years, some people that maybe started with us at the beginning of the year, so they hadn't truly experienced our culture before going into lockdown. So we really had to assess all of that and think, how do we reach out to our team members and stay in contact with them? So in some ways we did that on a one-to-one basis in the department and interdepartmental as well. So we kind of grew this schedule of programs throughout the months. I mean, when lockdown happened, I'm sure you, like me, we didn't know what we was going to do. We didn't know a plan, and we would have calls at the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day everything had changed again. So it's very much working on our feet, but quite quickly we established, okay, this is what our community is, and this is what people want. They want to be in touch with each other. So we did do the quizzes, like I'm sure all of you did as well. We started off with that. It got very competitive, and we had different employees take it on each week. We had different themes. Some of them were very hard, where I think I gave up on one of them. And some of them were really fun and dynamic. So we tried to keep it interesting that way. But we had to understand what was important to people. So some people wanted to see their team members from other departments because they do have relationships there. So we created a scheme of masterclasses that were offered. So we had our creative floral designer offer a class on houseplants. How do you look after them? Because that was a trend at that point. We did have our chefs do cook-alongs. So we didn't do the banana bread cook along, you'll be pleased to know, but we did do things like Toad in the Hole. We done cocktail masterclasses with our bar team. So we found an opportunity for every area to be able to showcase themselves, but other people be involved. The spa one, as you can imagine, was very popular, as was the wine. Our sommelier actually would send out a list of things. If you're going to the supermarket, here's wines to look for, ready for a wine tasting, so you can do it along with me. So it was very much a way of getting involved, and we would release a calendar on a weekly basis. On a Friday, here's what's coming up next week for you to get involved with. So that was a really successful piece for us. And in that calendar, it would be part of a weekly newsletter where we would share all the good news stories that we've seen from our team members. So some of our team members were doing things themselves for the NHS. We were doing things as a hotel for the NHS. And we also have a partnership with Manorfield Primary School. And at the beginning of lockdown, they were really struggling. They needed to remain open for children of key workers. And we found a big opportunity there for us to partner with. We had a lot of team members at home wanting to get out and do their bit to help. And we had a partnership that was already existing that needed help. So we was able to partner them. So we had some of our chefs cooking the school meals for the children. We actually had some of our chefs then go in and teach the children how to cook. So our very famous Salvatore, our Italian pizza guy, went in and taught the children how to make pizza from scratch, to the point they had a pizza party one afternoon. And then we also helped that local community. So that primary school is in a very deprived area where a lot of the children have and benefit from school meals. So every Friday we would send a group of our employees down there to go and pack food hampers to send out to the families of the children at the school. So we did quite a lot. It kept people interesting and wanting to connect with us. We built a program of history talks so we could learn more about our beloved hotels. And I mean, they did a lot of things themselves. Departments were making bingos, they were doing dress up days, they were doing MTV crib tours, they were doing everything and just sharing their photos. And we're very fortunate to have an online platform that allowed the community to come together and share what they were doing on there. So once we kind of got the ball rolling, it was very much down to our leaders and they took the lead there. So really proud with that. But it was a journey from the beginning of March when you couldn't get toilet roll to all the way back to reopening the hotel. It was chalk and cheese by the end of it. But it's as a sense of community, I think you have to learn and grow together. And that's definitely what I've experienced this year.
That's fascinating. All of that is amazing, the sense of community. And also what you've been doing in the community. Is that something that the Dorchester does anyway, or was this a new initiative?
It's a partnership that we set up in 2019 with the school. One of our chefs actually came to us just the year before that and said, oh, I'm running a big half marathon in support of my old school. Can I get a team together and let's run it and raise money? And I was like, yeah, of course. And then the more we found out about it, my director, Emma, actually got in touch with the head teacher, and then we built more of a partnership. And, you know, we didn't just do things at the school. They actually have a recreational centre in Stansted, Mount Fitchett, that was very run down, needed a lot of work. So we sent groups of our leaders and then subsequently our team members out to Stansted, the Essex countryside, to go and work on this recreational ground. And we was fortunate, it's got a lot of outdoor space. So we were running wheelbarrows up and down this field, filling in the rabbit holes, painting the old climbing frames, to bring that back into a place where, so now these children can go and do their recreational experience in this place now. And it's a partnership we continue. We're sending old bed linen there, making it into a luxury experience for the teachers that are going there. And now we've built that. So in 2021, we will have a Manorfield committee where we build an ongoing programme with them.
Yeah, I can see, Jonathan, how that sort of feeds into that sense of value, doesn't it? So it's value within the organisation in which you're working, but also value in the community and you know, doing good. I don't like that expression necessarily, but I can't think of a better one. But actually contributing to the community that you're actually living or working in, which makes you feel good, doesn't it?
I loved hearing those examples. They're absolutely brilliant. There's great examples of almost adapting what you do, what you've done to build that sense of purpose, a different type of purpose, but a purpose of actually we're contributing to something, which is brilliant. That ability to demonstrate competence and build competence. So you have the different parts of the organisation who are showing their competence and leading things, which is probably a bit new for some of them, but also to building the competence of those who are doing their sessions in terms of their feelings. So we had that element to it. And then thirdly, there was just some nice examples of actually the coming together of people to get that sense of belonging and feeling valued of this extra thing element that they were getting. And feeling that which wasn't a monetary value within it. So it was, hey, there are just plenty of examples within it. Brilliant.
Exactly. So Rachel, I mentioned at the very beginning that there would have been some people who, just because of their own personal circumstances, were really struggling. So have you been able to sort of identify and deal with employees who are struggling and need support, whether that's bereavement or even loneliness?
Yeah, that's definitely one of our big priorities. You know, as much as we've got all the fun and games and bringing everyone together, we actually set up a program with our leaders where they had to call every single one of their team members every single week to check in on their well-being and how they are. You know, working in hotels, a lot of our team members may travel from abroad by themselves to come to London, and they may live in a flat share. They might not know their team members very well because of the shift patterns that they work. So it can be a really lonely time. Some of them couldn't get home to see their families because of the travel restrictions and not knowing what was going on in the UK at that time. So through these weekly welfare chats, the managers that would then send through a summary to us in people and culture of what was going on with each person, and we was able to see the red flags there essentially. So, you know, everyone has had a rough time through this year. I wouldn't say anyone's found it easy. And actually, we done a bit of education around a term that we found at the beginning of lockdown called the Corona Coaster, and it just describes the ups and downs that you feel even just on a daily basis going through this global pandemic. And you could definitely see that week on week, but by seeing those red flags, we could then have a conversation with the manager. What are they doing to help that person? What is the need there? Do we need to reach out to them, check in on them, or maybe someone else? Have they got a friend here that they've been speaking to? Have they been getting involved with some of the things that we're offering? And then when it actually came to reopening the hotel, anyone that we knew was struggling in particular with loneliness and company and not being able to see other people, we prioritized them to come back to the hotel first, to make sure that they had that sense of being around other people again, friendly people that they know, that they enjoy working with. So I was able to bring them back quite quickly, because we wasn't able to bring everyone back straight away. As you can imagine, occupancy wasn't as we had wished, but that's definitely something that we had to take into consideration. And, you know, the tougher situations and the ones that we experienced, we were able to send care packages to. When the lockdown restrictions eased, we was able to do some social distancing, walks outside, just to make sure that we actually met them face to face. So we really took a lot of pride and time to review every single employee's status on a weekly basis.
Yeah, no, thank you. And what about the leaders and their development, or any development of any employee? Has that been a casualty during lockdown and the closure of the hotels?
For us, no. We recognise what our workforce is, and that we was asking the leaders to do a lot whilst they were going through the global pandemic themselves, so that they have their own personal situation of what they're experiencing, and then having to lead a team through that is a big responsibility. So around May time, we started a 10-week leadership course. So once a week for 90 minutes, we would bring a group of our senior leaders together and talk around all of the different leadership topics, change management, being creative and flexible. We've done emotional intelligence, we've done personality profiling. We've done a whole topic about the new normal and what that means. And it was all discussion led. We played videos through Zoom. We was doing competitions through there. We had a debate on one of them. So we tried to keep it interesting, but it's just a short 90 minutes. And they chose the topic each week. So we gave them a list of 10 and they chose the one they felt that was relevant for the week coming up. And that way we found the discussion was really helpful, that they realized they weren't alone in what they were dealing with and some of their challenges with the team. And they actually, by the end of the 10 weeks, created our return to work action plan based on what they've learned through this journey and what they know we needed when we came back. And out of that, we then created what we call a re-engage program, where we got every single team member through an online training before they return back to the hotel, so they know what to expect. We had changed a couple of things in the hotel, put in extra hand washing basins, and a lot of that came from this 10-week leadership series that we did, just knowing where our leaders are at and educating them around practices and theories they already know, such as the Kubler-Ross change curve, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those ones that you see time and time again, but how they've changed during 2020. So we've kept all those notes, and we're going to come back to them next year and see how we've evolved.
No, because I think that that's an area that perhaps some businesses have not considered, and I'm not just talking hospitality and leisure sectors, but all businesses, that perhaps career development or progression has come to a standstill. So I can see that that's been really important. What about the second lockdown? Have your initiatives been the same in the second lockdown? Have they been different?
No, this one's been different. I feel like we knew what lockdown meant this time. So it was a little bit more organised, and we actually took a whole day and came up with the plan for the month. So we said, right, we know we've got until the 2nd of December and we need to have a schedule. So we actually created an invite this time to do lockdown with us, and we created what is it that people are going to be interested in now. The season is very different. We've gone through spring and summer. We're now heading into winter. So people are less likely to be out and about. So, for example, the cycling competition that we did in the summer isn't going to work so much now in the winter. The daylight hours are between really 11 and 2. So we want to make sure that we're allowing people to get outside during that time. So we created a bit of an invite as to, here's lockdown with us through the next month. And we offered a few different things. So for example, we started a bit of a gaming community. We know that some people are interested in gaming, but they might not play each other. So starting that off was a really big thing for us. Some board games as well, you can play virtually. We're doing yesterday we did a mince pies and mulled wine lesson with our team. So getting ready into the Christmas spirit, and we're starting to do some Christmas competitions, who's got the best decorations in their house. So we've really had to adapt it to the season and what people are able to do now, but not repeat what we did last time, because it's tiresome, you lose interest. So we've tried to keep some of the other things that we did before where they were and adjust it to this new season, but recognise as well, it's been a month long. We don't know what was going to happen when we started this plan, and the ability to flex and change it if we needed to.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. I just want to speak to Richard now. He's been very patient, but I know that communication has been really important, hasn't it, with you, and that you've been really concerned to keep your employee goodwill and morale as high as possible, so that then when the hospitality sector is up and running, then you knew that you and your employees and your business was equally going to be sort of match fit and ready to go. So as I said, your initiatives have been focused on communication and contact. So can you share with us what you did and how that worked for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we look back to March, and we went into the lockdown, we were impacted right across the business, and we put about 65% of our people out on furlough. And before I put them out on furlough, I made a phone call to each person to give them the reassurance that we were doing this to protect the company in the long term, that we weren't able to carry out the works that we would normally do because hotels were closed, but during the first lockdown, a lot of building sites also closed, so the work that we'd normally do there wasn't available. And right from the outset, I set up a weekly call so that everybody could join on I did it on a Monday morning, so start of the week, so we could reflect on what had happened in the previous week and what was planned for the following week. And in doing that on a weekly basis, it gave everybody the opportunity to ask any questions, raise any concerns they had, but also it was, I think, invaluable way of imparting some information on what those people were doing that weren't on furlough, that, you know, the levels of business that we were doing at the time. I also shared a lot of the information that STR provided in terms of occupancy levels of hotels, what their predictions for the future were, some of the feedback that we'd got from speaking to hoteliers ourselves, so that, you know, people that were, you know, detached from the business in a way, did feel part still of what was going on. They felt informed. Any changes that we were making, it was an ideal opportunity to communicate that with people, introduce new members that we were taking on at times, and, you know, it was a very good forum for people to also ask those questions. We did a lot of the things that Rachel was saying, where, you know, we did have team calls with all of our teams individually as part of the management team, to check up on people and to have those sort of one-to-one conversations. And I think that the communication was really appreciated by everybody, and the openness with which we shared information, whether it was good information or bad information. I think that level of honesty with everybody is really respected.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually. In my past life, I was a divorce lawyer, and I understood really, really early on that people can deal with the truth if you tell them the truth. And it's the lying and the hiding and the not telling the truth, which is the most disruptive thing. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that, Jonathan.
No, I completely agree with that, and it's, I mean, there's obviously about how we tell the truth and our approach to it, but absolutely, people are very good at reading when there's some level of deception within what we're doing, and as adults, we have the ability to accept a decision, even if we don't like the decision, as long as we can understand it, and it's that understanding of it which is really critical in it.
Yeah, thank you. So Richard, do you think that you had lots of money in your coffers, and obviously I'm making no judgment as to whether you have or you haven't, but if you had or if you have, do you think that giving pay rises or bonuses would have helped with that goodwill or not?
I don't necessarily think it would have helped with goodwill. What we did for people that were on furlough, we said we can pay you 100% of your salary rather than the 80%. But to do that, you will have to sacrifice 1 day of annual leave per week that you're on furlough. So that gave people the option of, you know, saying, okay, I will have my full pay, and, you know, to then, I suppose that was the goodwill part that we were trying to gain, but it also took away a problem for us. That, you know, we knew that hotels would reopen, and as hotels reopened, it then provided more pressure points for us, because, you know, as hotels had closed, they closed very rapidly. Some of the systems had just been turned off. You turn them back on, you need technical support, things like that. So we saw a big ramp in you know, support that was required at that point, and I could see that coming. So asking people to sacrifice a day of annual leave meant that it actually took a lot of pressure out of the system later on, where people had lots of holidays still that they'd accrued during their time on furlough. In terms of, you know, bonuses or salary increases, I think because people could, you know, see from the weekly calls the effect that hotel closures have had on the business. And, you know, one department we have that sells spare parts and consumables would normally process around about 500 orders a month. During the lockdown months, some hotels were open. We were processing 20 or 30 orders a month.
Yeah.
So, you know, it just shows, you know, the level of that impact. And because I've shared that with everybody, I think they realised that, you know, I'm thankful that the company has treated me well, that they're communicating with me, that we still have a role, that, the certainty for us is that, we know that hotels will all reopen, that people will travel again, that occupancy levels will come back. It's when and at what level, and it's about that, us all surviving that period of time to ensure we get back to where we were.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Well, we're almost an hour, and time rushes by when people are saying amazing, interesting things. So some really interesting insights and sharing of ideas there. I think some themes have come out really in relation to communication being really key, but also community and belonging and creating a sense of value. All of which I suppose on one level are quite obvious, but never easy really to achieve, particularly in such difficult circumstances. So I don't know if anybody has any questions at all. I can't see.
Hi Helen, there's one question here from Jane Frost. Thank you for asking. So Jane Frost is an event manager / venue finder within the sector. She said most of our staff have worked hard from home throughout the pandemic and have either underlying health concerns themselves or care for people who have. How do we help them feel safe getting back out to events when they start happening again? I'd be interested to hear how, or our colleagues in venues that have been open dealt with staff concerns.
I don't know, Rachel, whether that's something you could potentially help with. I mean, I would say it's about doing risk assessments, isn't it? Really, you have to do all the risk assessments around the individual and the environment into which they're going. Do you have any insight in relation to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the education around is how safe is the place they're going to go to, what is the regulations and safety procedures they put in place there. And I think some of it, we had a lot of employees that were very hesitant to get out there. They had a lot more fear than other team members. And I think it's just a scale of how people are reacting to it. But what we kind of did is we selected some team members who were a bit more confident in giving it go and getting back out there. And we actually profiled them and celebrated them and said, look, they're back at work. Here's the arrival to work and showing the videos of what it looks like. So we kind of created a group of followers, so to speak, who then became the ambassadors for their other team members. So it wasn't just leadership as saying, we're going to make it safe. Here's your team members demonstrating that it is safe and how they feel about it. So I think knowing what the procedures are, how safe is it, and what does it look like in the different venues, but then actually having some people to demonstrate that and show that it is safe. We had one of our big sticking points was people were very nervous about getting back on their public transport. We've done a couple of surveys throughout and that came out big time. So we actually interviewed some of our team members that had continued to stay in the hotel to keep it open. So our security and engineering team needed to keep the building running. And we actually interviewed some of those to say, how are you finding the public transport? And we shared that video online with our team members so they could see where they haven't tried it, they could see what the reality is. And that actually was very helpful too.
Thank you, that's really, really helpful. Thank you, all of you attending, for being here and joining our virtual Perfect Storm. And of course, thank you to our brilliant panel, to Jane, to Jonathan, to Richard and to Rachel for all your insights. It's been absolutely invaluable. We're going to be doing the Perfect Storm virtually, probably more often than we did the face-to-face one. So in the new year, please look out for our next events. And if you have any ideas about subject or what you'd like to hear about or discuss, then I'd be really, really pleased to hear from you. And I think other than thank you, I'd just like to say good luck with your reopening on the 2nd and 3rd of December, and here's to 2021 and the end of 2020. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.